Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Robert James Stein. Mr. Stein was born in Chicago. He is a graduate of the University of Chicago with a Bachelor of Science degree. He did postgraduate work at the University of New York and Northwestern University. As an editor-writer for his company magazine, it received a Freedoms Foundation Award for the series of articles he wrote on Americanism and the free enterprise economic system. He is now employed by the Flick Reedy Corporation of Bensenville, Illinois, where he is Vice President of Administrative Services and a member of the corporation's Executive Committee. Commander Stein is the commanding officer of his Naval Reserve Unit. He is a Navy veteran of World War II and of Korea. He was on the staff of Admiral C. Turner Joy at Command Headquarters in Tokyo. He is the holder of the Individual Commendation Citation for his work during the Korean War. Mr. Stein spends many hours each week in reading and research relative to individual freedom and the individual responsibilities required by people who want to remain free. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I introduce Commander Robert J. Stein.
Madam Chairman, Doctor, and fellow Americans, it is a pleasure to be with you today. I bring you particular greetings from my boss, Frank Flick, who is very sorry that he couldn't be with you today. In fact, for the whole 3 days. And so he asked me to pinch hit for him. Now, if you got too worried about my being a vice president, since the caliber isn't really too good these days, I hope to dispel your apprehensions. I would like to talk with you about what can business and industry do to help preserve our American Federated Constitutional Republic under God Almighty. But perhaps more specifically, what has our little Flick Reedy Corporation done in this respect? So I am speaking perhaps more particularly to those of you in the audience who are engaged in business and industry. And if you also have young men and young women at the college level and find a few moments here and there to look at their textbooks on social studies and economics, if I understand them rightly, then I should perhaps address you as fellow exploiters. Now, I would start by sharing with you sort of an idea we have. We are a rather small company, so I think that our little motto, which is a paraphrase, is most appropriate. And you may recognize it as a quotation or a paraphrase of a quotation from one of the early American patriots, Edward Everett Hale. But our paraphrase goes something like this: we are only one company, but we are one company. We can't do everything, but we can do something. And what we can do, we ought to do. And what we ought to do, with the grace of God, we will do. Now, every time I get out to speak someplace, my wife, usually surreptitiously, finds occasion to slip a little note among my notes, lest I get too garrulous, and you know how wives are. And this little note always says exactly the same thing. It says, "Little note nor long remember." So I'm warned. I think first I might establish our idea, share with you the nature of the responsibility of business and industry in the context of our overall subject. We hold that we have a responsibility to customers to deliver to them a quality and a quantity product with pride in our product, willing to stand behind it, so that every customer shall have received a square deal. Just a quick story to illustrate that point. There was not too long ago a very large customer of ours who had some trouble. And he felt that part of his trouble, at least, might have been the use of our products. And so it was suggested that we share in the, perhaps several $100,000 cost in the problem that he was experiencing, and that we ought to share part of that loss. Well, my boss, Frank Flick, is not an appeaser by any means. And so he said to them something like this: "Gentlemen, let us get together a group of engineers from both our companies and look into this problem in depth. And if, in fact, your problem stems from our product, its deficiencies or lack of quality, then I will not allow you to pay 1 penny of your losses. We will pick up the entire cost. However, if as a result of our engineering studies, with your engineers as a part of them, the fault is not with our product, we will not pay 1 penny." Well, now, that takes a little gumption, particularly if you knew the size of that particular customer's volume with us each year. But there was an engineering study made jointly between the two companies, and it was found that there was a condition of use which was not in accordance with the specifications, and that their engineers admitted that they hadn't been using the products properly. And so my boss stuck by his guns and said, "All right, we don't pay 1 penny." And they accepted that fact, and they have become better customers since that time. Secondly, we hold a responsibility to shareholders, a much maligned group of people these days. We feel that we must conduct our business in a way that will give security to their investments, and that we have a responsibility to pay to them dividends, profit, whatever you want to call it, for the use of their money. That is their right and their due, and we hold that responsibility. Next, we have a responsibility to employees, to provide them with the proper combination of opportunity and security, a recognition of their individual merits, and a fairness to all, right across the board, in terms of pay and working conditions. And last, perhaps a responsibility to the general public. Might even call that the government of the United States. But the government of the United States represented by all the people who are the government of the United States. And that we ask nor accept any governmental money, tax favors of any kind, protective legislation. We feel indeed that if this is free enterprise, we shouldn't be asking for special favors at the expense of the taxpayers. And that we should, in our daily activities, be an integral part of the community and the nation, to be loyal to our country and its ideals, and to be a good example of these things at all times. And so, one of our keynotes might be the phrase, to promote individual moral responsibility through education. So we feel it's incumbent upon us not only to be informed ourselves, but to help inform those who are willing to listen. That obviously includes our employees, but it includes quite a few others as well. I would say about 9 or 10 months ago, the vice president in charge of sales came in and said to a group of us, "I have a contract here for quite a few $100,000. This would be very big for us." So we all looked very happy about it. But it was discovered that, at least indirectly, these products were to go behind the Iron Curtain. And so Frank Flick, said, "Now wait a minute." And he pulled out, as each of us do, his little rather threadbare copy of the Constitution of the United States, and he turned to Article 3, Section 3, and said, Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. We sell nothing that's going behind the Iron Curtain. And that ended that. You know what she said. Now, calm down. Now, there is another aspect of business and industry today called advertising. Use of the mass media to achieve specific kinds of results. And this is kind of a thorny problem. But at our company, we have adopted the policy of not placing advertising with those media who make it a habit to slit our throat on the editorial pages. It is somewhat difficult to find media that meet those criteria, and I can't help but put in a plug for our good friends at the Wanderer. We have an education program for our employees, a voluntary one. You can't really twist anybody's arm, and those of you who are perhaps have been doing this for some time, you know how far you get by shaking somebody by the lapel and saying, "Look, you stupid fool, don't you realize this?" Well, so you've got a whole new set of friends, just like I do. But we try and provide for those who are willing to listen and to read a measure of education for our employees and our management groups of people, an understanding of why we hope to preserve for them the right to work without having to pay anyone to hold that job, a reward of merit for merit's sake on an individual basis. Yes, we have the whole gambit of reading racks materials to encourage them, sending letters, magazines of certain kinds to the homes, a weekly newsletter, all these sorts of things. We also sponsor an association, an education association, and some of you may have seen the booth up on the mezzanine. We feel that we have a responsibility to make known to our representatives in government the best of our knowledge, and we communicate with them frequently. We know them. We make it a point of knowing them, not on a favoritism basis. We want to call a spade, and when they do things that meet with our approval, we tell them so. That gives us, then, you see, the right to give them constructive criticism. Not long ago, my boss was asked, among others, if he would like to testify before one of the House committees with reference to the repeal of 14B. And I think I can't give you any better picture of my boss and our company than to share with you his very brief remarks before the committee. How many minutes? 5? Not yet, huh? All right. I would like to tip you off in advance as I read this statement that while we're talking about the right to work, which most of us would consider involve primarily union interests, I'd like to have you notice that he does not deplore or degrade unions, but literally accepts the responsibilities of management. So he had this to say: do state right-to-work laws protect the rights of employees? I am not going to talk about union rights or responsibilities or unions at all. I'm not going to talk about employee action to protect their own rights. I am going to talk about management's responsibilities to constitutional law, to moral law, and to its employees. No one can deny that in the past, management has failed to discharge these responsibilities on its own. Management needs the aid of special legislation, such as the right-to-work law, to meet these responsibilities. My major premise is this: suppose someone infringed upon the workers' constitutional rights. Would the government have the obligation to protect the workers? Of course it would. The 5th article of the Amendments to the Constitution reads in part, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of laws." And my minor premise is this: when management requires employees to pay dues or assessments, it is depriving the worker of property. For a wage earner acquires a full and real right not only to the remuneration, but also to disposal of that remuneration as he pleases. And that, some of you may recall, is a quotation from Rerum Novarum, or the Condition of Labor, by Pope Leo XIII. He continues, the worker must pay or seek employment elsewhere. Now, true, the employee has a choice of seeking employment elsewhere, but today, the opportunity of securing continuous employment elsewhere without similar infringement is little or no choice at all. If this choice is exercised, the worker soon finds it extremely difficult to discharge his moral obligation to support himself and his family. Furthermore, management, for whatever reason, is unwilling or unable to avoid depriving the worker of his property. This is evidenced by management's past and present performance. Where can then the worker and others seeking fulfillment of the moral and constitutional law obtain justice? I say that management has not been able to provide it. And so the foregoing inquiry leads me, under the conditions of our time, to this inevitable conclusion. The Congress has both the right and the obligation to prohibit such infringements upon the workers' rights by at least retaining Section 14b, which preserves for the states the opportunity to enact right-to-work laws. The infringement of which we speak is upon a guarantee contained in the United States Constitution. So it would seem proper that federal right-to-work laws would be the moral and legal order of the day, rather than a consideration of repeal of Section 14b. For Section 14b, at best, is a small protection to the constitutional rights of all workers, since only 40% of the states have up to this time passed right-to-work laws. I therefore urge leaders in management, in labor, in the church, together with the executive and judicial branches of the government, to petition the Congress to retain Section 14b and to enact stronger legislation to prevent management from infringing or being forced to infringe upon the constitutional rights guaranteed to workers in the 5th article of amendments to the Constitution. I think that gives you some idea of the kind of thinking and the kind of fortitude displayed by our boss and as a leader of our company. In conclusion, our corporation considers that as a corporate entity, it has a moral obligation to fulfill its responsibilities to God, to family, and to country. And since we can't do everything under the sun, and since we are a relatively small country, I would then close with the way I started. We are only one company, but we are one company. We can't do everything, but we can do something. And what we can do, we ought to do. And what we ought to do, with the grace of God, we will do. Thank you.